Welcome back to Was Justice Served? It's great to be back for our second season. I'm Jen Baldwin, professional genealogist and research specialist for Find My Past.
And I'm David Wilson, Emeritus Professor of Criminology at Birmingham City University, author and TV presenter.
In our first episode of the new series, we're delighted to be joined by our special guest, Rav Wilding. Rav served in the British Army before joining the Metropolitan Police and is now the longtime presenter of Crime Watch, among other TV programs. Rav, thank you so much for being with us and welcome to Was Justice Served?
Hey, thank you for having me. And I'm so excited about this because I know you've got a really, really juicy story for us to get our teeth into today.
And it'll be interesting to see how your background, especially on Crime Watch, might help with particular aspects of the case, Rav. So thank you for coming in.
I'm looking forward to it.
I think it's going to be a fun one, especially. The case comes from 1860, and it sees a former police constable tried for willful murder. Ooh. Maybe a little too close to home?
Yeah, this is going to be a tough one. But no, I want to know more. I mean, 1860, so things are going to be so different straight away. And I suspect the way that the police would have looked at this crime is going to be totally different how we would look at it today. So I'm really looking forward to uncovering a bit more about this.
Absolutely. Well, let's get into the details. Let's hear a little bit more about what happened.
It's an unseasonably wet day in Stepney on Friday the 17th of August 1860. At a small two-storey house on Grove Road in the heart of London's rapidly growing East End, cobbler James Ems is knocking at the wooden door of his employer, Mary Emsley. A stern, eccentric woman, 70-year-old Mary is viewed with a mixture of curiosity and dislike by the inhabitants of Grove Road. Despite her age, she would make long journeys to collect the weekly rents from the inhabitants of the grim brick dwellings she owned across Stratford, Bow and Bethnal Green. She's not a woman to mess with, known to be ferocious in collecting, evicting and managing the 500 properties that house the city's poor. Yet Mary is frugal with her considerable wealth, living entirely alone and shunning all luxuries, save for a charwoman who cleans her small house every Saturday. On the doorstep, Ems knocks again, without a response. He starts to worry about the sinister silence within the house. Could she have come to harm? He wonders. Mary was not in the habit of admitting unknown people into her house, and would usually check from an upper window who was calling. Ems eyes the upper window, which remains firmly shut. He decides that the best course of action is to get some help to investigate, and goes back along the street to collect Mr. Rose, Mary's attorney, Mr. Faith, a distant relation, and Police Constable Dillon. Of the four men, Ems is the most familiar with the house, so leads the way over the wall into the neglected garden and up to the back door. They force it open and are immediately greeted by a foul smell. They find no sign of Mary in the downstairs room, so take to the stairs. On the landing, Ems stops suddenly, staring ahead of him at a perfect footprint outlined in blood on the wooden floor. The door it is pointing away from is partly closed, and Police Constable Dillon is the first to try to push through it. But something heavy is blocking their entrance. The smell is now overwhelming. Inside the room, the body of Mary Emsley lies prone on the floor. The elderly woman's skull has been pulverized, the violence of the blows sending blood spatters in 3 directions around her body. She is fully dressed, and she is surrounded by rolls of wallpaper, 2 of which are in her arms. But the men can find no evidence of a murder weapon. They sweep the house. Nothing of value has been taken. In fact, the murderer has overlooked the £48 stowed in the cellar. Police Constable Dillon's colleagues are sent for, and they quickly establish that Mary must have been killed at some point on Monday evening, 4 days before she was found. They also speculate that the murderer was someone she knew and trusted to let into her house, with a small fortune offered as a reward to anyone with information on the case. It isn't long before another of Mary's employees, plasterer James Mullins, comes forward and points the finger at none other than Ems.
Well, gentlemen,
Wow.
that's a lot. An elderly widow as our victim, no forced entry. What are your first reactions?
For me, this is what criminologists would call an ideal victim. if somebody who's older, somebody who's very young, or somebody who's older, ideal victims, the community will want to gather around and help uncover who might have caused them harm. But for me, the sign of no forced entry does imply, doesn't it, Rav, for you, that she's probably let the person in?
Interestingly for me, was no forced entry, okay, but I did pick up on the fact that there's clearly a disturbance downstairs. There was chairs upturned, cupboards seem to be rifled through. So even though it suggests that she has let someone into the home, something has definitely gone on inside. Could that be potentially a robbery gone wrong? Be interested to know more.
What I'm also kind of interested in is that, you served in the Metropolitan Police, Rav, but here we're in 1860. The Met, as you know, is set up in 1829. It's sort of engraved on everything that you would have to read when you were becoming a police constable. So this is relatively early in Scotland Yard, to use those terms, in Scotland Yard's history. So there'd be a lot of focus on the police getting this right. There'd be a lot of local interest in such a vulnerable widow who has been murdered in this way. There'd be a lot of interest in whether or not the police were going to be able to solve the crime. And that must put pressure on the police, whether we're talking about 1860 or today.
Yeah, we just heard there the local police were the Stepney police, which is the area where she was from. And it gives the impression that the police are local to the community. And this lady was very, very well known in the community. She had a massive amount of property that she owned. So we know that a lot of those properties were rented by people in the community. And there will be that pressure on the police to get answers for someone who was incredibly well known to them.
Yeah,
Pressure
definitely.
will certainly be on the shoulders.
So if you're the person walking into this crime scene in 1860 or today, what's the first thing that you're looking for? What's your first step?
Well, there's a number of things that you need to consider when going into any crime scene, but something like this, I'd be thinking about forensic potential. Now, back in 1860, we wouldn't have had a national DNA database.
No.
We certainly wouldn't have had DNA, which was only really discovered for use in criminology in 1984. So those two things would be at absolute paramount importance. You'd also be looking for things such as CCTV. Today, of course, we're blessed. We've got CCTV not only in the streets, but a lot of people have dash cam footage in their cars and video doorbells, for example. Mobile phones. Who leaves home without a video recorder in their pocket? So there's a lot of extra footage we'd be looking for now. You'd also be thinking about witnesses. They could be absolutely crucial to a case like this. Who would have seen this lady come and go? Who would have seen what happened? Who would have seen something that looked suspicious? And you'd also be thinking about looking after her family. Who was this woman's family? Who are they? Who's looking after them? And what can they tell us about her to give us clues as to what happened?
And of course, you're describing the things that would be available to the police today that wouldn't be available back in 1860. We don't really have fingerprints at this point either, nor do we have photography. So there's no photographs of this particular crime scene that we would be able to consult. So we're relying on descriptions, and sometimes the descriptions, Jen, different newspapers will provide different descriptions that again might lead to confusion in relation to this particular case. But as Rav was saying, this is a wealthy widow, and therefore potentially we've got a number of different suspects, and the crime scene and how the crime scene is described and what is made of the crime scene initially by the police will dictate a lot of their investigation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We know in this period, in the Victorian era, they would typically kind of station plainclothes officers to kind of monitor the neighborhood and look for any potential local suspects. So they did that in this case.
Of course, we've been discussing what the police at the time wouldn't have: DNA, fingerprints, photographs. But what they do have would, of course, they'd be able to build up a picture of who this victim was, who she had relationships with, how extensive her family might have been, which sort of friends or enemies that she had in the community. And therefore, building up a picture of her as a victim is going to be really important.
Oh, it's absolutely crucial, because with any crime, it's not just who's committed it, but why has it been committed?
Yeah, and one of the ways in which they did some of that during this period is because this is a property, right? She owned this home. This is an unsolved case. They actually had a policeman and his family move into the house.
Gosh.
As essentially an active crime scene, right? What we would think of today as an active crime scene. The tragedy of that is that the day they kind of do this, one of this policeman's young sons ends up falling out of an open window and he dies.
Wow.
So this keeps the story alive in the press. It becomes even more sensational. The community continues to follow the story, of course, because they know there's active police, work happening in the building. And then, of course, this young child has also lost his life.
Jen, I wonder if you can help us, though, build up a better picture of the victim, Mary Emsley, and just give us some starting points about the other main people involved.
Yeah, absolutely. So from the genealogical standpoint, Mary is actually born Mary Williams in 1794 in Ratcliffe, the Tower Hamlets, the East End of London. Her father is Samuel Williams. He's a shoemaker. So they are not in any kind of a middle-class situation. They're still fairly low class, but they're not doing horrible. She marries twice. Her first husband is also a shoemaker named John Jones. He dies in 1833, so quite a young marriage. But during that marriage, Mary gives birth to a child which dies in infancy. The second husband then is Samuel Emsley. The couple marries on the 8th of April, 1843 at St. Dunstan's and All Saints Church in Stepney. Samuel is a stay and shoemaker. So he is a widower himself. He ran the Octagon Stay Manufactory, and he is making stays and corsets for women of an upper class. So she is marrying up. He's making, probably by hand, garments for women in a much higher class. So he's able to charge more and making more money. He had at least 2 children already from a previous marriage. So in the 1851 census, the family is living in a well-to-do area of Bethnal Green, which is now part of Queen Mary's University. And interestingly, she's listed with an occupation on the census. She's listed as a collector of rents. So they're on the edge of this middle-class area collecting rents from the slums.
So that already, Rav, does indicate there might be people who would have grievances against us in the East End. What was the East End like in this period?
Yeah, very similar to today, right? In terms of the dynamics of the community, money and culture kind of rubbing shoulders with poverty and violence. Lots of expansion, urbanization. It's dirty, it's smelly, it's the Docklands, it's a melting pot of cultures, lots of trade and heavy construction. And it's definitely an area where the slum kind of goes right up against the wealthy merchants and higher end homes and classes. It's really interesting to me that she comes from this background of lower class and marries up, and she stays in this kind of gray zone of classes kind of mixing together.
Gosh.
Wow. That's fascinating just hearing more about her like that, isn't it?
So Samuel dies in 1856. So she's now been widowed twice at the age of 66 herself. Samuel was worth over £100,000 when he dies.
Wow.
So Mary actually inherits hundreds of properties across East London.
So there's a nice motive already. If we were thinking about robbery.
Yeah.
That's a huge sum of money, isn't it?
Yeah.
And she would be well known in that area.
She would definitely be well known.
Yeah. So if she owns well over 100 properties, it sounds like, in that local area, she would be incredibly well known and known that she owns that many properties. And if people are struggling for rent, which it sounds like that area was very tough, very poor, very working class at the time, could potentially be a lot of people that are really struggling and not too fond of someone who has made that much money out of the likes of them.
I agree. And is there an extended family who might also think that they could benefit from the death, her death?
So she is acting as the matriarch of this extended family, though she has no biological children of her own. So all of these relationships get a little bit convoluted. There are a number of stepchildren and their spouses. So William Rose, who was part of the group that discovers the body in the first place, is one of those spouses. It's a wealthy family, of course, right? They have a shared interest in collecting their profits from their tenants.
And presumably she herself didn't collect the rents, Jen. Did she use the extended family to do that for her?
She did use the extended family, but she also collected rents herself.
Oh, gosh.
Wow. That would be extremely rare, surely.
It's quite rare for a woman in this period to be doing that kind of work at all, and certainly even rare for her to be listed as the property owner, right? Even as a widow, it more likely would have gone to one of the sons or the stepsons.
Do we know anything about her character? Do we know about Mary's character? Because if she's collecting the rents, you can collect the rents and be seen as kind of nice, or you can collect the rents and be regarded as rather ferocious, can't you?
Yeah, I don't think in the slums nice rent collector is going to work, right? Like
far.
you're not going to get your money. And rent collectors at this point collecting from the Victorian East End, this is cramped, unsanitary conditions. You might have 4 to 5 families per property, and that could even mean 2 or 3 individual families per room.
Oh,
it's not just a 3-room house that has multiple households in it. It could be room by room. So you are in each other's lives. You're hearing each other's arguments. You understand when babies are being born. Right? All of that is everyday life is happening kind of with paper thin walls. So the environment is very much kind of what you think of as the slums. The average rent at this point cost, in terms of relative to wages and cost of living, somewhere up to 50% of their weekly income. So the vast majority of their weekly income is going to their rent.
Now, if she's still collecting rents herself, that does imply she's still physically capable, physically active. What do we know about her personality, though? Do we know something about her character?
So from the court testimony, we actually get quite a decent understanding of Mary's personality. We know she's quite uncompromising in how she collects that rent. She takes that very seriously. One of the quotes from the trial comes from one of those stepchildren and one of the spouses. And he says, although she was advanced in life, she was particularly active habits and well able to take care of herself.
I see.
So she is in her senior years, but she's definitely living on her own, doing her, doing her job and running her role, but also running the family and running her own household quite independently.
Was she a generous woman? Was she somebody who, had good causes within the community that might have created people feeling kindly towards her?
There's a quote in here that you're going to love, Dave.
Oh, okay. What am I going to hear?
So she's listed as being quite miserly.
Oh, I see.
Miserly.
Yeah. She was too miserly to indulge in anything beyond actual necessities, and those of the most common quality, as she had been seen purchasing small pieces of stale meat at the cheap butchers. Which is definitely part of her upbringing, right? Her childhood, coming from that poverty-stricken family in her background, she is buying the cheapest and holding on to every penny.
But she's obviously making a lot of money from these properties. So what's she doing with this money? Do we know that?
So we do know that she's not putting it under her mattress.
Okay.
Yeah. So she takes the rent collections and she actually has the local pub put the money in their safe, and they give her a receipt every time. She doesn't trust the banks to actually house her money. She puts her cash into buying more properties rather than her lifestyle. So she continues to invest. Essentially, she's really being a good businesswoman, right? And there's really no money kept in the house. And the people close to her, including her family, all testify that they would have known this. Everybody knew that she didn't keep the cash in the property.
So I'm building up a picture, though, that if she's miserly, she's buying cheap meats, stale meats at the cheap butchers. There might be some people who think that's rather, that's kind of refreshingly frugal. But on the other hand, the majority of people are going to say, especially if she's giving money to be kept in the safe in the pub, those people, the publicans, are going to talk quite quickly about how much she's taking in per week from all these rents. There's going to be a lot of... I started out by saying this is an ideal victim. Yeah. This is somebody that lots of people must want to find out who did this murder. The more I think about it, there seems to me lots of people who might want to see her dead.
Absolutely. And 1860, the pub was it, wasn't it? That was the main
Absolutely.
social meeting place for so many, especially men back in the day that would meet there after work, and things would be discussed. There was no mobile phones. That was it. How you get the news across to each other. And if bags of money are coming in every single week and being stored there, that word would get out pretty quick.
Jen, let me ask something a little more cautiously. How should I phrase this? You know, from the first series, I sometimes just go a bit kind of gangbusters with my descriptions. But let's just say this is a woman who's still physically active. She's been married and widowed twice. Is she still having affairs in the community? Does she have lovers? Does she have lodgers come round to stay?
So we don't have direct evidence of her being in an intimate romantic relationship with anybody at this stage in her life, but that doesn't mean that there's not people hinting at that around her doorstep.
Even the way you said that kind of implies, doesn't it, Rav? If Jen was giving evidence, now you'd be like, yeah, come on, tell us the story. What is happening
What
there?
have you found?
We're not in an interview here, just to make that really clear. She is really suspicious of strangers. We know that from her behavior, and the neighborhood knows that about her as well. She doesn't let people in after dark, especially who she doesn't know, that she's not close to. The neighbors in the trial report that she questioned visitors through a window if they were attempting entrance into the house before she would let them in. Even though she was quite suspicious of people kind of coming to her door, she had one close friendship, at least, with a local Presbyterian preacher. His name is Reverend Joseph Biggs. There's a bit of a difference there between like the Church of England as kind of this stereotypical faith of the country versus that nonconformist belief and how they administer. They can sometimes be a little bit more passionate in how they deliver their sermons, that kind of thing. We also know that Joseph Biggs would come through and visit her in the evening. So he is one man, at least, that she would allow entry into the home.
Did he have a key? Did Joseph Biggs have a key to the house?
I don't know if he had a key, and I don't know if he had a drawer either. So don't ask me for his things, right?
But so we know that this is somebody that Joseph Biggs maintains a friendship with her, that she's interested in Joseph Biggs.
Yeah, and I think he's worth looking at a little bit more. So let's introduce Joseph Biggs very quickly. He's kind of an interesting character. He's born in the Tower Hamlets as well, so he's local to the area, born in 1797, so just a few years younger than Mary. He's actually baptized in the Quaker faith of the Society of Friends, which, again, another dissenting nonconformist religion, very unique and very specific in their beliefs. He had been married to his wife, Martha. She dies in 1854, and they have at least one son, Samuel, who actually turns out to be quite a talented musician. He's an organist and a pianist. He's from a very well-to-do family, actually, so very opposite childhood story from our victim today. In 1841 census, he's listed as living on independent means, which essentially means he doesn't have a job and he can sustain himself out of his own bank account. By 1851, he takes a role with the Presbyterian Church as a subordinate minister. So he has, at some point, converted officially and actually entered the role of minister and essentially kind of working as a minister in training.
And Presbyterianism more generally, what does that imply? What should we take away from the fact that he's not Church of England, he's not Anglican, he's Presbyterian?
Right. So we're actually looking at a church or a faith that becomes quite popular through the UK and in the United States. In the United States, it actually turns into some of those congregations that you see kind of throwing their hands in the air and singing very loudly. And they're very enthusiastic in their style of worship. The Presbyterian Church kind of has tendencies in that direction in the UK as well. So they're not quite as exuberant, perhaps, as worshipers in the United States, but kind of along those lines of religion doesn't have to be boring and staid and very composed. It's okay to be emotional during service.
So if we can just recap then, what have we got? Our victim, Mary, has risen up from a slum background, has been married and widowed twice, and she's become this quite ferocious, wealthy landlady who is quite miserly, buying cheap meat at the butcher's. And she has a friendship, let's put it no more strongly than that, although already I'm kind of suspicious being a Presbyterian. She's got a friendship with Joseph, who is a Presbyterian minister, who we don't know if he's got a key, but he may be somebody that we have to keep listening out for, I suppose. Would that be about right, Ralph? Have you got suspicions about other people?
Well, from a police point of view, you'd always want to know about who discovered the body and work backwards from there. So find out who that is. What do we know about the person who raised the alarm and found her?
Right. So his name is Walter Ems. He's actually born Walter Thomas M. or Ems. It's listed both ways with the S and without on the records in 1817 in Surrey, actually. He marries a woman named Anne in 1839. They have 4 children together. And he comes from a family of shoemakers. So he is also listed as a shoemaker. So that's a theme that kind of keeps popping up. At the time of the trial, he lives in a small cottage in Emsley's Brickfield Globe Town in Bethnal Green. He also worked as a rent collector and handyman for Mary. So he works for her. He has a long-standing relationship with the family.
Does that raise your suspicions, Rav?
It's interesting when you say handyman. I wonder if he works within a property. If he works within her own home, he may well have access to it. That's interesting. That he works for her.
I think it would be more likely that he does handyman work inside her property that she lives in versus the properties that she rents, right?
Yeah.
Because as a leaser, right, you keep it as cheap as possible so that you make as much, right?
It doesn't sound like they're particularly luxurious.
Yeah, exactly. You're not
rented
replacing the wallpaper necessarily every year, every time someone new moves in.
Okay, so let's look a wee bit more at the police investigation. But I think what you're doing is you're setting up a number of suspects, aren't you?
Well, I like to do that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's good that we've got Rav here because he can help us go
That's
through
right.
who might be the most appropriate suspect. But there's a kind of a long drawn out police investigation, isn't there? Because partly to do with the fact there's very little evidence to go on. We've got this bloody boot mark. We've got no signs of forced entry. There are some trivial thefts. There seems to be elements that could call this a crime of passion as well, Rav, because of the skirts being raised. And we've got this issue about wallpaper. Was there wallpaper? Was somebody bringing wallpaper to the house, to the home? That kind of issue as well. But frankly, what they would be doing, I would have thought, is something that is still done today. They would have been knocking on doors, trying to find out, build up an intelligence picture about the victim.
I would like to think so. And what we call the door-to-door inquiries, when you're literally doing that, exactly that, where you're banging on doors, asking what people may or may not have seen, it's so fruitful in so many investigations. And even ones that you think there's no one's going to have seen or heard anything, you will always get someone who did and hadn't thought to come forward with that information. So I think in 1860, that's exactly what they would have done. This is Stepney. This is a busy part of East London. There's a lot of homes all tightly packed together. And I think they would have done exactly that. Knocked on doors, find out any witnesses who saw what they saw with her last movements, anything at all that could be potentially of interest. Even the position, she was apparently looking out the window to let people in before. What were the windows like? Was she looking out? Was she seen looking out of the windows? These are all questions I would like to have been answered.
Well, actually, Rav, I think there is some information from police reports at the time that give us some indication to how to answer the questions you were posing. There's a police report that detailed that her tenants numbered some hundreds, some of whom are the most depraved and lowest class, and who have frequently threatened her. So quite clearly, that gives us some indication about how she's seen in the local community. And 2 months before the trial, people were eventually put on trial for her murder. A newspaper report tells us that Mary had brought 15 tenants before Bow County Court to demand unpaid rents.
Wow.
And here's the kicker for her: the magistrate found against her and awarded the tenants money.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah,
So that's
it's quite a dynamic.
15 people that clearly had a grudge against this lady straight away. So now it's getting wider and wider, the potential pool of suspects that we're looking at here, just from what we've heard in the last few minutes.
And the quote that you read there, David's interesting because to me, because they use the term most depraved and lowest class. The newspaper is setting up to their readers that these people are subordinate to her. that she is the superior person in this story. Not necessarily because she's the landowner, but because she is of a higher class, right? So they are degrading them intentionally and trying to set the scene that one of these people potentially could be the killer.
And of course, because of that class division distinction, and because the police are seen as making slow progress, Rav, the government issues a reward for information which increases from £100, which would be £10,000 in today's money, to £300, which would be £30,000 in today's money. And that kind of offer of a reward,
that's a lifetime.
Yeah.
That's a huge amount of money.
It's a massive amount of money.
£30,000 in today's money. This is 1860. The Metropolitan Police was set up in 1829, and when they were first set up, the weekly wage for a police constable was £1.05 a week.
Gosh.
So even if it had doubled by 1860, just say it was £2 a week, £300 is still a good few years worth of salary.
Yeah.
So that would be a lot of money to anyone to be offered. And money talks in investigations. Every single series of Crime Watch, which I work on, there will be appeals that have a reward linked to it for information, typically that leads to arrest and conviction of an offender. And that is very often what gets people to come forward with the information they know, if they think they're going to get financially rewarded for sharing that.
And do sometimes people come forward, Rav, even today, with information which is either already known or information which is misinformation in the hope of actually getting that reward?
It certainly happens where people try and give misinformation in order to just get the money, but they're quickly weeded out. This has to be fully checked, and the people themselves would be checked out by the police and make sure that they're not just trying to get money for nothing. It has to be supported, have to support an investigation, but it's certainly a useful tool in so many serious cases. And I'm sure this would have got a massive response in 1860.
Yeah, so unsurprisingly, a man comes out.
Fancy that.
Yeah, crazy, right? You know, humans are greedy characters, right? So James Mullins is really the last person we need to introduce and talk about in this story today. So about 2 weeks after she's discovered dead, James Mullins walks into the Bethnal Green police station and gives a statement regarding the murder.
Wow.
How common is this, Rav?
For people to come in once a financial reward has been put up, it's pretty common. Now, the days of just walking into a police station and giving that information is slightly different now, because we would typically have an online system or phone numbers where people can call in with that information and a large amount of anonymity that they can hide behind as well. This wouldn't have been the case. So although it sounds slightly unique that he's physically walked into a police station with that information, it doesn't sound completely out of the blue to me, because there wouldn't have been another option.
Sure. Okay.
But for someone to come in with information saying, I know what happened, where's the money? Yeah.
But you would, whether we're talking about now or then, somebody coming forward, you'd look into their background to establish what sort of person they were, how trustworthy they were, could you rely on what they were going to tell you?
Yeah, you'd certainly do the checks on them. And it's not to say you wouldn't take the information if they've ever been in trouble with the law, for example, because their information is as good as anyone else's. But you would certainly do your checks to make sure they haven't, for example, done this 7 times before and given false information to police 7 times before. And it could be a case of the boy who cried wolf.
Right.
So you'd want to know who this person is and do a little bit of digging into exactly who they are and if you can believe what they're saying.
And the great thing about this podcast is we have somebody who will have done research into who this Mullins was, and she can provide us with distinct information about his character.
No one
Please.
saw that coming at all. No one. So, James Mullen, born in Ireland in 1806. His wife, Catherine, is also Irish. They moved to London as the kind of what we would refer to as a migrant family. While there, the couple had at least 4 children together. Baptisms show the family is Roman Catholic, and of course there's a large Irish Roman Catholic community in London during this time frame, right? We're talking about right at the start of and during the famine. Moving over to England is a lot less expensive than going, say, for example, to one of the countries in the British Empire or to the United States. So it's an easy out in terms of getting out of Ireland and getting away from that kind of social and political situation. So in 1841, in the census, we find them living in Stepney. He is actually working as a police sergeant for the Metropolitan Police.
Ooh. Okay.
I was hoping for a bigger reaction. I'm going to be honest.
Well, you go around when, ooh, what more do you want?
I don't know. Something. So we know from testimony in the court case that he had worked a robbery case for Mr. Emsley before. So he actually knew the Emsley family, right? So he worked for Mary's late husband when he was robbed. He was celebrated for his success on that case and even received a promotion off of that work. He retires on a police pension of £32 per year from the Met. So this is about half a year's wage for a skilled tradesman. It's not very much, but he sustains an injury, and so it's kind of a forced retirement, right? They kind of push him out. And he eventually becomes a railway policeman, kind of a rent-a-cop, if you will, for the local railway.
That's interesting. So other than being injured here, do we know anything about his character? Is he a decent fella, would you say?
Well, I think that depends on your definition of decent, maybe. In 1853, when he is working for the railway, he's actually caught stealing a shawl and some other articles. So he's a thief. Okay. And a rent-a-cop. It's covered by the Illustrated Times in 1853. He stole lengths of cloth from a package. A search of his home found scraps of the material, and dresses were already made by the cloth for his wife and daughter. So they are wearing the stolen goods, essentially. His wife, Catherine, was found to have pawned some of the cloth and lied about buying it at the market. They also found several other stolen items, including drawing instruments and a case of clothes. So not things that you would find necessarily in that family's home. One of the quotes from the papers, one of the mentions is that it's not a little singular that Sergeant Carpenter, the officer in the case, should have been instrumental in obtaining the male prisoner his situation at the railway. And in all cases of robbery at the station, the prisoner was confidentially consulted. The fellow in all these occasions evinced great anxiety in the matter and was frequently heard to say that he only wished he could lay his hands on the thief.
Oh.
So there's a potential for a number of thefts that he's involved in, but he's always interviewed behind closed doors.
Interesting as well, the railway, we've been talking obviously with Ralph's background about the origins of the Metropolitan Police in 1829, but clearly the railway is also emerging and developing and becoming a really important source of transport. Mm-hmm. But of course, with every new development, there can be crime associated with this developments, and the state has to find ways of protecting people from becoming victims. I'm interested to know what happens to him when he is convicted of this crime. What sentence does he get?
So he gets 6 years, actually, and he serves 4 of them at Millbank Prison.
Now, Millbank was the very first. So we've been talking about development of the Metropolitan Police. We've been talking about development of railways. Millbank was the very first state prison in this country. It's the first time that the government finances, builds, and runs a prison. Prior to that time, it had been local magistrates, it had been families, there had been private prisons. This is the first time, Millbank is the first prison whereby the state is going to run a prison. And of course, Millbank no longer exists, the prison, but Millbank occupied the site that's now occupied by the Tate Gallery. And of course, it meant that the politicians could walk up from the House of Commons to see what was happening. And they did. They often would take meals in Millbank, and just opposite Millbank would be the Thames, and sometimes the hulks that would transport people to Australia and to other places were just moored up opposite the steps of the prison. So, you've got a real picture here of London emerging, I think, through this case of new developments, the state with new responsibilities, new agents of the state required to do things in terms of law and order.
And also it gives you a sense of how seriously they take a conviction. Mm-hmm. If this man stole material and some other items from his place of work, he got sentenced to 6 years, served 4. That's a long time. And those prisons would have been a tough place, David, wouldn't they, back in the day?
Yeah, potentially deadly.
Yeah. So if anyone's found guilty at this time, this is bad news for them, especially something as serious as a murder.
Yes.
Yeah.
And of course, there's this whole concept of rehabilitation now. That's the other thing. When people leave prison, we hope that by giving them a sentence, giving them a jail sentence as a form of punishment will allow them to change their behavior. But we know how difficult rehabilitation is in contemporary society. But does his prison sentence, Jen, mean that he becomes unemployed, or is he...
So it doesn't come with the same connotations then as it does today in terms of occupation. He actually kind of switches gears completely. He becomes a plasterer, and he works almost exclusively for Mary and her rental properties.
I wonder if Mary was aware of his background.
I wouldn't be surprised if she was. Again, thinking about her background in the slums and the neighborhood that they live in and the properties that she owns, it may have even been a case where she was looking for kind of that tough character, right? Here's a former policeman who isn't afraid to also break the law and serve time. He knew what he was getting into going into that jail. So he probably came off as a pretty decent candidate for her because she can trust him to defend her properties.
Yeah, and that's what she wants. They're clearly what means everything to her, these properties. That's why she's buying more and more and more. They're her babies in many ways. So she wants someone that can do that.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I'm just trying to remember. I'm trying to remember my history. So he was sentenced to 6 and gets out after 4. So this is the Victorian form of parole. A Victorian form of parole was called a ticket of leave. And people who were given tickets of leave were known as the tickets of leave men. And there were moral panics about ticket of leave men in London because those particular parolees, as they are today, we're talking when prisoners are being released early because our prisons are overcrowded. And there's always media stories about crimes committed when people have been released early and haven't served their whole sentence. And there was a moral panic about ticket of leave men. And I wonder to what extent does Mullins fall into that suspicion that people had. It might have been helpful for Mary to have somebody who was regarded in this kind of tough way, but I wonder to what extent did Mullins fall into that suspicions that the public had about people who'd been in jail and what happened, what they would do once they got out of jail.
Yeah, and how easy it would or would not be to hide something like that. If they're on one of these tickets when they've just come out of prison, that information surely back in 1860 will be spread amongst the community pretty quickly.
Oh yeah, I would think so. Yeah, absolutely.
It's really interesting to hear more about James Mullins' character there. But he gave a statement to police. What did he say then?
Right. Remember, this all starts with him walking into the police station, right? So it's the 9th of September, and he actually accuses a man named Walter Ems, who, if we go back, he's our shoemaker, handyman, rent collector. He accuses him of the murder. He says that he watched Ems take a suspicious package home and conceal it in his outhouse. He leads police to the home where they find a package in the exact spot where Mullins points to it. It is found to contain some stolen items of Mary's. They arrest Ems, who of course is very upset, and utters the sentence, "By God, this is a foul plot."
Well, it does sound like it, to be perfectly honest, doesn't it?
Wow.
Interestingly enough, police are suspicious of Mullins and they arrest him alongside Ems. So they take both of them in together and the pair are charged with Mary's murder.
But that's odd that both get arrested, isn't it? Rather than just one or t'other. But look, rather than try to answer that question now, let's see how all that plays out at trial. Okay, let's look a little bit about the trial. Let me provide a bit of an overview as best as I can. The trial's going to begin on the 11th of September, 1860, and Walter Ems and James Mullins are jointly accused of murder. And here's what's really interesting. At the very beginning of the trial, the case against Ems is dismissed. And I think perhaps behind the scenes, he's turned what we would call Queen's evidence, King's evidence now, and is going to be used as the key witness against Mullins.
So he's turned key witness, but I want to know what this key evidence is against Mullins and why that seems to stick, yet Ems is allowed to turn as a witness straight away.
I think actually that's part of the key problem about everything that we're going to discuss. Because what to me is so fascinating in the trial is that the evidence that feels very compelling one way can also offer compelling reasons to show the exact reverse. And it was actually something that Arthur Conan Doyle, who, as you know, wrote the Sherlock Holmes stories, noted in a later review that he writes up about this case and is frankly horrified by, namely that you could be incriminated by things that could also acquit you. But if we just look at the evidence that's presented by the prosecution that links Mullins to the murder, firstly, there are possessions found at Ems's house. They tried to paint a picture that the package Mullins had led police to was him planting evidence against Ems. So, for example, they pointed out that the tape on his mantelpiece corresponded very closely with the tape that the parcel had been tied up with. There were 32 strands in each. There was also a piece of cobbler's wax used to wax the string of the parcel. Now, cobbler's wax was not a substance which Mullins needed in his business, so their theory of the prosecution, was that he had simply procured it in order to throw suspicion on Ems, who was a cobbler, a shoemaker. They also presented what could have been a possible murder weapon. A plasterer's hammer was discovered, which, as you'll remember, there were awful injuries to Mary's head. Mullins had also stolen some items belonging to Mary, a spoon which corresponded closely to the spoons which Mary Emsley had lost. It was shown also that James's wife, Catherine, had recently sold a small gold pencil case to a neighboring barman, and 2 witnesses were found to swear that this pencil case belonged to Mary and had been in her possession a short time before her death. What's that making you feel?
Yeah, that's a lot.
I mean, it's still not that much evidence, though. That's what's striking here, and this is all coming out at trial.
Yeah.
This information, and this is coming out at trial in September of 1860.
Yeah.
The murder only happened a matter of weeks before.
Yeah.
This is a murder trial. That simply would never happen today.
And of course, what do you feel though, Rav? Because people will say to me, circumstantial evidence. This is circumstantial evidence, which always gets tainted with being second-hand, second-rate evidence. But many cases are solved through circumstantial evidence.
Absolutely, and it can be crucial evidence still. But another thing that makes me feel very uncomfortable about this case, and whatever the eventual outcome may be, is that you've got Ems and you've got Mullins that were both charged with the murder. Both Ems and Mullins had both been in and what we call cross-contaminated each individual crime scene. Ems has been in and physically walked all over the crime scene where Mary died, and Mullins has been to the outbuilding where Ems was allegedly putting the stolen property and even manhandled it himself to show the officers where to go. So they're both ruined in evidential sort of eyes what was there. Well, so it's, fascinating.
That's actually a really good point, I think, to make about the cross-contamination. But look, there is medical testimony, and there's obviously the boot and the blood. And at court, the prosecution presented a pair of Mullins's boots, one of which appeared to fit the impression on the floor. Remember, there was the bloody boot print on the floor. Medical evidence attested that there was some human hair on the sole of the boot. The same medical evidence swore to a blood mark on the gold pencil case, which had been sold by Mrs. Mullins. Now, I don't think there was an appropriate chain of evidence there, is what you're saying.
I'm guessing there's no gloves being used when they pick these things up.
There'll be no gloves, no scenes of crime officers keeping it forensically sterile. I can't imagine that was happening in 1860 here. There's all sorts going on. I mean, look, they're working with what they had. And when you read it like that, David, there is a lot of information that's come out that the court would have heard that may well point in one direction or the other, but there's also a lot of holes as far as I'm concerned at this stage.
But I mean, what we're saying is that forensic science in 1860 is not just in its infancy, it's almost just simply being born. And given that, I think there was some kind of creativity in terms of how they went about the investigation. So, for example, the bloody boot mark.
Yeah.
They actually went to the effort of sawing it out of the floor and covering it with an oilcloth before taking it to the police station for tracing.
If nothing else, you have to give them credit for effort.
Exactly.
Right?
So they're definitely trying to preserve that as best they can. What they won't have, obviously, because it's 1860, was the ability to do what we call a mechanical fit today, where you would get the original shoe and physically prove that that is exactly the one that would left that imprint. And from that, you can also find all sorts of things, such as what we call the gaits, the way someone walks, the way their foot would pro or supinate, turn in or turn out. There's all sorts of things you can find from that. Now, they wouldn't have had that, but that would all be evidence that could help prove or disprove the person in the dock is the person who left that shoe mark. But they're certainly trying.
But again, we go back to that point, don't we? Because it can't be shown definitively, there is always a defense to that particular piece of the prosecution's case. But there are still evidence that's presented by the prosecution in relation to the wallpaper and a key. So, for example, the charwoman who cleaned Mary Emsley's house on Saturday gave testimony that she had been in the house 2 days before the murder when Mullins had called, and he brought with him rolls of wallpaper. He'd been directed by Mary to carry it up to the room in which she was later killed. So again, we're back to circumstantial evidence, though. So the prosecution argued that Mary had been discussing wallpapers in that room with her murderer at the time that she was killed, and more than likely with the person who had originally brought them. And the last piece of evidence they brought against Mullins was a key. During the day, Mary Emsley had given Mullins a key. This key was found lying in the same room as the dead body, and the prosecution linked this directly to Mullins having been at the scene. Now, remember, there was no sign of a forced entry, so the key does become relevant, and that was why earlier in our discussion, Jen, I asked if the Presbyterian vicar who had shown an interest had a key. And the prosecution's final element to the case was to produce witnesses that linked Mullins to the time and place. Witnesses to prove Mullins had been seen both going to the crime and coming away from it. So, for example, they had a Mr. Raymond swear that at 8 p.m. that evening, he had caught a glimpse of him in the street near Mary Emsley's. And he gives a description of what he's wearing. He says he's wearing a black billycock hat. Jen, what is a black billycock hat?
It's actually just another name for a bowler hat. So very common. Exactly what you all imagine in your mind when I say bowler hat.
The prosecution also got a sailor to testify that he had seen Mullins at Stepney Green a little after 5 a.m. the next morning, and his attention was caught by the nervous manner and excited appearance of the man, and also by the fact that his pockets were bulging. But the sailor said that at that stage he was wearing a brown hat rather than a black billycock hat. In your experience, Rav, as a police officer, how reliable are eyewitnesses?
I mean, they can be reliable. I think a difference between a brown hat and a black hat at 5 a.m. when it's still likely to be slightly dark.
Yeah, it's September, right? I was just going to ask that. Like 5 a.m. in September, I feel like it's not that bright outside.
It's not
to
the height of
differ.
summer.
Yeah.
So I think that would be perhaps a reasonable thing for someone to maybe make a mistake on. Your attention to be drawn to someone's pockets bulging. I don't know the last time my attention was drawn to anyone's bulging drawers. I mean, your wallet may be bulging, David, when I see you. I see that. But yeah, maybe my pockets bulging. But out of all the types of evidence, when you've got forensic evidence, and then you look down the list and you've got eyewitness testimony, it is a lower form of evidence in terms of reliability because it's subjective. Everyone's different. Everyone's recollection is different. What one person sees, the person stood next to them may see and interpret something completely differently. So I wouldn't say that's the strongest thing we've got there, but it could be.
And also, quite apart from, you were quite right, I think, about that analysis of eyewitness testimony. As Jen pointed out earlier, this is a case that's going to attract a lot of newspaper attention.
Definitely.
And these witnesses are coming forward after the newspapers have been writing about it, after rewards have been offered in return for information.
Yeah.
But Jen, what do you think of the case built against Mullins so far?
So I have to agree. I think it's all pretty flimsy. I really question any eyewitness when there's that kind of cash coming up. I also think socially it's really interesting that they use a sailor to testify because sailors had very, very bad reputations during this period. So putting a sailor on the stand is not really your most reliable source. It's not like you're putting, I don't know, prime minister on the stand, right? Like to use two extremes, but sailors were really poorly seen in this period. So that would have been questionable just in and of itself.
Ralph, where are you standing on the prosecution case?
I would have to agree at this stage, very, very flimsy indeed. But what was interesting was you mentioned wallpaper.
Yeah.
And a big link to wallpaper, and the person being responsible must have something to do with wallpapering. And the body was found with 2 rolls of paper around her arms, which sound like they could well have been wallpaper. So there is some sort of interesting link. But what would have happened if she was speaking to someone about wallpapering her home for them to be that irate that they killed her?
I mean, people do get excited about wallpaper.
I mean, it has to be pretty special.
We're being given a little glimpse into Jen Baldwin's domestic life. People do get excited by wallpaper.
No wallpaper. None.
You have a fan?
No.
Yeah. Not after hearing this, you won't.
Yeah. So we are in a situation where there's a lot of what we would now call circumstantial evidence.
Yeah.
But circumstantial evidence isn't necessarily second-rate evidence. Circumstantial evidence is used today in trials to prove guilt. But the defense was able to mount, I think, quite a convincing defense in relation to what was alleged by the prosecution. For example, about the hammer, which was an alleged murder weapon. They said, well, it's not unusual for a plasterer to have a plasterer's hammer. Yeah. And of course, they wouldn't be able to do the detailed matching that would be done today to see if that was actually the murder weapon. The hammer itself was picked up by police, and an inspector testified, quote, "It was lying on the floor. There was no concealment about it. I examined it directly and found it nearly in the same state as it is now. There was some plaster on it. It was not so clean as it is now. It appeared to me as if it had been used." So there again, the hammer which seemed a crucial piece of evidence, now appears less so. There's no evidence of bloodstains, concealment, if it was used as a murder weapon. Rav, what do people usually do with incriminating? I'm asking you an easy one, I think, here. Mm-hmm. What do people usually do with incriminating weapons?
Well, 2 things. First of all, I'm gonna come back to your question shortly. I have to say you're in luck today, because not only am I a former police officer, when I left school, I trained as an apprentice, dryliner and plasterer.
Oh my word!
And you're just now telling us this now.
No, why didn't we know this at the start?
One of the tools I got as part of my training was a plasterer's hammer, and they are very different to ordinary hammers because they have a wide tacking end for hammering in nails. But on the reverse side, on the rear, it is like a chisel. So it's very different to a normal hammer, which would be more sort of claw-shaped at the back. And it's the chisel that would be perfect in this case for inflicting the fatal wounds on Miss Elmsley.
Why
So
are we
that's why-
rediscovering this? Why are we rediscovering now that Rav was a plaster?
That was the best. That was perfect. You had that in your sleeve since we first introduced him, and that's so great. Well done, Rav.
So I know, had one of these tools, know them well. Yeah, okay. And secondly, though, in answer to your question, David, evidence. If a weapon was used in a murder, the first thing a suspect would already do is try and dispose of it.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes they do it in a better way than others. Very often it will be straight in the river, straight in a bin, try and get it away quickly, or with a bit more thought, they'll get it further and further away. It will be highly unlikely with an incredibly well-publicised case like this, which was the only thing it seems anyone was talking about in the area, that you'd leave it. You'd leave it in the house.
They are really close to the river here.
So
and
close.
whoever did this had hours to dispose of that weapon.
Absolutely. And surely this is a time when there was even more rivers than we know today in this area.
Exactly. We're recording this in Fleet Street. The Fleet was a river in London. I hesitate to ask a former plasterer this question, but was hair used in your day to strengthen plaster? Because in the Victorian period, hair had been used, human hair, horsehair, ox hair was used to strengthen plaster. And the defence therefore pointed out that, finding hair wasn't that significant because plasterers would use hair all the time.
It's certainly not something I use as part of my plastering training. I got a lot in my own. I certainly didn't use it. Anything I used back in the 90s would have been synthetic. So everything's moved now as a sort of bulking agent and a strengthening agent and also a soundproofing agent when it moved onto the boards. But it is something that I have heard they have used in the past. So for that to be used as some form of defence didn't shock me.
And of course, there was no way of proving that the hair that was actually found belonged to Mary Emsley, and no proof of any blood on the boot, which was supposed to have produced the blood print. So the boot becomes less of an issue for the defence. The defence are mounting bit by bit by bit. They're breaking down the prosecution case. In terms of items stolen from Mary Emsley, they're pointing out that the Mullins family has a history of stealing, not for violence. The barman testified that when he bought the pencil case from Catherine Mullins, he had carefully cleaned and polished it, and the blood stain could not have been Mary's. It must have happened later. And the defence also call alibis and witnesses, particularly Mullins's children, Mary, Thomas and John, all teenagers, all testified that they came home early on that particular Monday. That itself seems a bit suspicious.
Definitely
if you ask me.
suspicious. Teenagers, in this sense, were not called teenagers. They were just adults that were working. And in this class, in this lifestyle, you didn't come home from work early. That's just not something that happened.
So 13 back then was essentially
an adult.
An adult.
Yeah.
It's interesting that we even hear that these youngsters are in a court giving evidence of such a crucial nature in such an important high-profile trial like this, because obviously today things will be so different. And although children and youngsters can give crucial and vital evidence in a case, the way they give their evidence is so different. Very often you would do what's known as an ABE interview, which is achieving best evidence, where you would actually video record an interview, and usually that is enough in order to be played as evidence. If they are required to give live evidence to a court, they can do it via a live feed, where they don't even have to be in the courtroom. Sometimes they're in the building in a separate room. Sometimes they can even do it from another location and give the evidence that way. Everything's about safeguarding. So to hear that these youngsters, which were essentially treated as adults at the time, are doing that, it's so different.
And for their father, no less.
Yeah, of course. And they're going to want to protect their father, even if their evidence clearly sounded like it didn't stand up at all.
It's
collapsed.
baloney. It's
It's baloney. Well, look, a big part of the defence case was actually to challenge the discrepancy of the evidence of the witnesses, Raymond and the sailor, who's not named as far as I can see, and proving that their testimony was worthless. We've already discussed that one hat's described as black, the other's described as brown. The sailor had met a man, he says, was Mullins at Stepney Green, which was quite a way outside of the route Mullins would have taken from the scene of the crime to his lodgings. And then, as you were pointing out, Rav, do you really notice bulging pockets? Only a few small articles had actually been taken from the house, and they would not cause the robbers' pockets to bulge. And there's no evidence from Raymond or the sailor that Mullins was carrying the plasterer's hammer. So that seems like a pretty robust defense, doesn't it?
There's a lot there. There's a lot there that would seem to suggest Mullins hasn't done this.
Yes.
I think if nothing else, they are carving holes,
That's-
like really big holes into
Well,
the
a plasterer's
prosecutor's
hammer,
case.
the rear of
Right.
a plasterer's hammer, which I know very well, as you now know, is specifically used to chip off old plaster. That's why it's shaped like a chisel. It's for using like a mini axe. Think of it like that. And that is certainly how it feels that the holes are being chipped away in this story. And there are gaping holes that are appearing that...
When was the last time you actually did some plaster work?
Oh, it was only about a year ago.
Oh, you still
Yeah.
got the skills.
I wouldn't say that. You didn't see the finished product. Yeah.
So there's a few things that really challenge the whole theory that the prosecution is putting forward, right? And we can continue to explore some of these. Let's talk a little bit about the next witness that they produce at trial. It's a woman by the name of Mrs. Barnes. She's a neighbor of Mary's, and she lives in Grove Road, just opposite her house. So she basically has a direct view of Mary's property. She testifies that she last saw Mary on Monday morning, and then at 9:40 a.m. on Tuesday, 12 hours after the time of the murder, according to the police, she saw someone moving paper hangings in the top room. So we're back to our wallpaper.
Well,
Right.
you love a bit of wallpaper.
I mean, it's my favorite thing.
Yeah.
She also saw the right-hand window open just a little bit, which of course is unusual for Mary's behavior, right?
Yeah.
Because she is the woman who's not letting anyone inside her home. The quote that she provides is, "I saw the house on the Tuesday morning. I saw someone moving the paper on the Tuesday morning. The paper was very white outside, paper hangings. It was in the top room. I saw the right-hand window of the top room open a little way, which attracted my attention. I saw the window move. It attracted me being opened. I saw it opening. I could not tell who the person was that was in the room."
Okay, so that's a significant piece of information that challenges the prosecution, as does the whole idea of motive, isn't it? Motive. The police, right from the start, are focused on the idea that Mary is murdered as a consequence of a robbery, because that's why they look at the items that were stolen from Mary's home. The theory was that there was a financial incentive as well as a grudge carried out by a local person. But as we've been discussing from the start, everybody knew that Mary was miserly, that she kept her money not in the house, but kept it in the safe in the local pub. Both Ems and Mullins owed their livelihoods to her, if you think about it in that way as well. They were dependent on her as an employer. And in their search, the police found £48 in a box in the cellar. Now, if robbery really was the motive, if it was financially, if it was about financial gain, wouldn't the murderer have done a thorough sweep of the house, especially as they had all night? However, she did have a great deal of property, and that isn't concentrated on, is it, Jen?
No, not at all, actually, in the case, which in my opinion is a huge mistake, right? You follow the money. And in this case, the money isn't tied up in those properties. There are people that are lined up for this huge inheritance, right? So if we're talking about motive, we have to consider the stepchildren and their spouses. Mr. Faith, who is married to one of Mary's stepdaughters. He's questioned at inquest, and he immediately comes in and says, "I know nothing of her death. I don't have any information for you." But he was never actually asked. He was defensive right from the get-go and just kind of walks in the door, putting his hands up. But talks of her property interests and believed that they should be left to his wife and her sister. Did not believe there was any other family interest or claim. So Mr. Faith's wife is lined up to receive all of this property. But technically, many of the properties were actually owned by Mary independently of her late husband, so not affiliated with the stepchildren at all. She had a number of nieces and nephews who might have been left these in her will.
It doesn't massively strike me as that odd that someone would be defensive when being asked about the police about this case when they're being called in for questioning, depending on when it was. Because if Mullins volunteered information to the police and ended up getting arrested for murder straight away, once that word has got out, I would imagine everyone would be very reluctant to give information about the case to the police in case the same happened to them.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
And of course, if we don't focus on this being a robbery that goes wrong, and we've kind of outlined why it doesn't strike us as being a robbery, what about if we concentrated on this being a crime of passion? She seems to have known her attacker. She lets her attacker into the house, or the attacker has a key to the house. And doesn't that bring in our Presbyterian vicar, Mr. Biggs? Wouldn't he be somebody that could be looked at in relation to this, Jen?
I mean, I definitely think so, right? He's a widower. He's known to have repeatedly proposed marriage to Mary, who rejects him, teases him even about leaving him her property. He's a Presbyterian minister, so again, kind of a little bit more excitable and enthusiastic in terms of his personality and the way he preaches, so not a straight-laced clergyman, if you will. And he visits her every Sunday evening. He's trusted to enter the house. Remember, he's one of the only people that she actually lets in kind of in the evening hours. He's due to visit again on Tuesday morning, but did not, with no explanation, right? We have the witness across the street who never says anything about him coming in. And of course, he typically visits in the evenings, but it's a morning visit that he's expected for. So all of this kind of wraps up together. And I want to ask Rav, really, there's so much going on here. Does this strike you as any case that you have worked on? Is there anything in your real life experience that you can kind of bring in alignment with this?
I mean, I dealt with an awful lot. I can't think of anything quite as chaotic, really, as what we're discussing today. Because only now we're really looking at this priest a little bit further as a potential suspect. And if we cast our minds back to the start, where we see that Mary's lying on the floor, her dress is apparently raised, as according to one of the officer's reports, that to me, as a police officer, would instantly think, well, that needs to be explored. And the motive, as you say, David, could this be a crime of passion? We have no evidence that any medical expert has done anything more than a head examination. You would then look at the body forensically to see if anything else had happened, which would suggest as a potential motive and indeed link it to a suspect. So there's all sorts going on that haven't been explored. And obviously this is a long, long time ago and they wouldn't have the resources that we have today. I can't think of a crime scene that I went to that had so many avenues open as we're seeing here. But I also wish I was a detective back in 1860, because I think what a fantastic time to work. Because with the knowledge that I would take from today, to incorporate that into a Stepney in 1860 would be just fascinating.
Do you know, I'm so pleased you said that and you didn't want to be a plasterer in 1860. That would have been really rather...
Yeah, I don't fancy matting hair into my plaster and spreading it on someone's wall.
Look, none of the things that we've been discussing were brought to trial. It's one of the things I always say about trials. They're actually not searching for the truth. They're just trying to tell one's trying to tell a compelling story, more compelling than the other story that's going to be told. But it's been good fun to kind of speculate through these issues. But I just wondered how you would sum this up. What would be your verdict? Jen?
I definitely think, without a doubt, he is not guilty. I don't think Mullins did this at all. He's just not in the right position. He's not presenting the right personality. None of it adds up for me. And the Reverend getting tossed in, which of course they don't talk at trial at all about, he's just too suspicious.
Rav?
I don't think Mullins is guilty. I think his previous bad character has gone against him. I think it's very much what we would call today a trial by media. The public have got behind this trial so much. He didn't stand a chance once he was accused of this. I think he was probably after the money.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what drove him to show the police where these items are that he may well have heard about or seen. But I don't think there's enough there at all. Even the footprint we've discussed, there's no evidence to say, other than it's a male shoe, that actually says it is the shoes he owns or has. There's just not enough for me. I don't think he's had a fair trial.
And why do you think Ems gets let off? Why is the case dismissed against Ems so quickly?
I think the evidence of bad character against Mullins, the fact that he's been in prison for theft and he was clearly dishonest in the past, has gone against him. And I don't think he was ever going to get a fair trial as a result. And I think Ems seems to have come from a better class, perhaps. I don't hear anything that he's been in trouble. His whole family were able to support his alibi that he was ill at the time of the murder and couldn't have gone out and done anything. And I think the court just believed him because he was from in their opinion, a higher class of the community.
Yeah.
And I personally, for what it's worth, don't think you can prove or disprove any of these characters as being guilty or innocent. And I would probably fall back on that favourite Scottish verdict. None of this has been proven. These are not proven. And that would be where I would stick. There is no evidence that, for me, could demonstrate guilt or innocence. And I wonder to what extent, Rav, that we're in a situation where the police feel they need to get a verdict so as to demonstrate in 1860 that they're competent of investigating heinous crimes and bringing a culprit to justice. Do you think there's that kind of pressure?
I think there will be massive pressure. I mean, we've discussed the police was still in its infancy, really. It'd only been around, 30 years at the time? So I think the police had that pressure on their shoulders and they needed to get an answer. Someone was going to pay the ultimate penalty for this crime, and we just don't know if it was the right one.
And so, of course, isn't that interesting? There's a conundrum at the heart of this case, because our victim doesn't come out very well initially. You know, she's miserly. She's buying cheap cuts of meat. She's throwing tenants out if they can't afford the rent. But then suddenly the public opinion turns and they want to get a culprit. They want to catch her killer. And Jen, what is the outcome?
Yeah,
what happens?
He is executed by hanging at Newgate Prison on the 19th of November in 1860. His was actually one of the final public executions at Newgate.
Allegedly 30,000 people turned up to watch it. I mean, that's just a staggering amount of people. That's how many people were behind this case and literally wanted his blood.
In his final statement, which he gave to the aldermen on the morning of his execution, he maintains his innocence throughout. He claims that he had been convicted through the most false and gross perjury that was ever given in a court of justice. Every word of the two witnesses for the prosecution were totally false and untrue. He added, they swore their falsehoods against me in the hope of obtaining money, the produce of my blood. The two witnesses have caused my poor wife to be made a widow and my poor children fatherless. At the conclusion of his speech, he reiterates that he has made this statement in order to let the public know that my life has been taken away by the most gross and most false swearing evidence that was ever given in a court of justice, all through the hopes of getting money. So we go right back to the idea of money as the one singular motive.
And what happens to Walter Ems?
So he actually just continues his life, right? He continues on as a shoemaker. In 1861, in the census, he's living at Park Street in Globetown in Bethnal Green with his wife Anne and their children. He dies in 1868, but he actually ends up committing suicide. He hangs himself. And of course, his death certificate then states that he is of unsound mind.
It's interesting.
So, Rav, do you think justice was served?
The evidence for me is just too weak, and I don't think a fair trial was had. Mullins may have had something to do with this, but it's just not a fair way of looking at it. It's not fair. He hasn't had a fair trial in any way for me. So no, justice was not served.
And I'm going to agree with my esteemed criminal justice colleague and say justice was not served in this case.
Well, the ultimate question, was justice served? I think you're both right. I think they got the wrong guy. And I think there's just too many questions, right? There's too many people involved in too much chaos, to use Rav's word from earlier, to be able to say that a fair trial was had and the victim has been properly justified.
But Jen, does this mean you're not going to bang your gavel, or are you going to bang the gavel?
I'm not going to bang the gavel on this one. I don't think it was the right outcome.
Well, thank you very much, Rav, for joining us. It's been a real pleasure to meet you and share. And, you shared so much and brought so much to the podcast. I think I will treasure the plaster of reminiscence.
Was justice served? History was made in that moment. Yeah,
absolutely. I'll give you my business card for the plastering. But no, it's been absolutely fascinating, and to go back in time to 1860, and for everything that you've both given me about setting the scene, what it was like, talking me through this case, and really getting into it and giving our opinions. I've absolutely thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you. I would absolutely love to revisit this case. I think there's so much more on it. I'd love to turn up there with a film crew and just see what happened there. This poor woman bludgeoned to death. Weeks later, a poor child fell out the window and died. So much has happened there. And just weeks after this murder, a man that we all think shouldn't have been convicted was executed. So much history. I want to explore it more.
Well, next week, we're going to be looking at a dramatic poisoning case from 1886, and join us as we decide whether or not, in that case, justice was served. Jen Baldwin, you're going to join me again, aren't you?
Of course I am. As always, we'd love to know what you think. You can review the case files on findmypast.co.uk/was justice served. Delve into our treasure trove of historical newspaper pages and play detective for yourself. And we'd love to know your verdict. Share your thoughts with us on social media at findmypast with the hashtag #wasjusticeserved.